Now, soil carbon. Soil carbon is an interesting one. It is a sequestration activity. It creates non-Kyoto carbon credits. It gets a lot of press. There is no methodology yet. I don't think it's even on the positive list yet, but they are coming. There is a lot of very smart and talented people working on this. It is very difficult to prove what is the actual human-induced amount as opposed to the natural ebbs and flows. With soil carbon, there's a bit of a saying that it's sequestered slowly and lost quickly. Soil carbon, you have to maintain those increases for 100 years. So you have to think about, well, okay, if I've got it into my soil and I've got to keep it there, what does it do to my future management activities or my future management options? You want to know what that does to the change in your price of your property. That say, yeah, here's the property, but here's a whole list of things you can't do because we have to maintain the soil carbon in there. The other thing about it, I think with soil carbon, I think the most important thing to understand is that there are so many very, very good reasons to put carbon back into your soil, but somewhere near the bottom of that list would be carbon trading. I've never actually been asked for a tonne of soil carbon. Right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it and shouldn't do it for all the right reasons. But it's a difficult one, it's expensive to measure, but they are getting closer and better, and it might be an opportunity. So starting to look a little bit more detailed at some of the activities out there, or the possibilities, is things like looking at for intensive ag opportunities. These intensive ag is good because we have controlled emission sources, we have controlled rations, we have very confined emissions, we have high emissions in a small area. They are looking at things like feed supplements, and we have a methodology out there now for changing the feed in dairy cattle. There's a company looking at doing stock blocks, changing it from urea, nitrogen and urea in the stock blocks to ammonium nitrate. I don't believe any cows have blown up yet, but they are just working on that one at the moment. You look at things like early finishing, more meat, less methane, get more efficient, get more productive, you get a double bang for your buck. You get your cows out quicker, you use more of the feed. If they're burping less, they're converting more feed to food or fibre or milk. So you get those double benefits because you get carbon credits as well. Genetic manipulation is one thing they're looking at as well. These things are taking time, all right, because even though cattle burping is one of the biggest emitters, it's one that we don't have a lot of technology around at the moment. We don't have a lot of science around. There's a guy over in Western Australia called Phil Farco from the University of Western Australia, I think he is, and he's working on Aeromophila species and putting Aeromophila species back into paddocks. There's the emu bushes, there's a couple hundred different species I believe, and he's looking at using it as a pig feed. So just by putting it into the paddock, the cattle will go over and eat it, and it's a natural inoculant for the methanogens in their stomachs, and it reduces carbon. That's the science behind it. Next is the challenge for people like myself to turn that into a methodology and get carbon credits back to the landholder. But we know that it will actually work, but Phil Varco's work is quite excellent, and it's worth a look if you get a chance. The other one that's getting pretty big is methane capture and destruction. This is where you collect all the manure, you put it into a tank or into a covered pond, and you turn it into methane and generate electricity from it. This is a pretty big one in piggeries as well. And there's a company in Young, a family-owned piggery that has got methane ponds, covered ponds on it. They've dramatically reduced their electricity bill. Their sheep are now happier, their pigs are much happier, and they're making energy, getting electricity out of it, reduce their electricity costs and getting carbon credits as well. So they're pretty happy with it, very happy with it. For broadacre, I don't think there's that much just around here, but some of the things you're looking again is enteric fermentation, soil carbon sequestration. Forestry is definitely an opportunity where you're looking at doing windbreaks. Again, plant them for the right reasons, look for your cross-production benefits, your erosion control, salinity control, natural regeneration. A lot of properties have almost redundant areas that generally cost more to manage than they produce, that you can get producing out of them. So I come from a background in whole farm planning, and I think it is absolutely paramount that that's where people start. Have a look at their property and go through the whole farm planning process. And if you can identify areas that would benefit from trees, bang them in. Ultimately, one thing I was taught very early in my forestry days was that before you plant a tree, before you go to the extensive cost of putting trees in the ground, etc., or changing your management practices, you need to think about where the market is and what the market actually wants. What are you going to sell these things into the future? And the market's pretty clear. We've spent a fair bit of time with a lot of the large purchasers, and we have standing orders for plenty of carbon credits if we can get our hands on them, is that they need to be fit for purpose. we've got a very small demand for, and we're talking hundreds and not thousands, just hundreds of credits in the voluntary market for those non-Kyoto credits, but we have an insatiable demand for those compliance credits. We have to get as many as we possibly can for our purchasing clients. They need to be fit for purpose. They want them de-risked. They don't want to invest in projects now that will deliver in 3 to 5 years. If you look at venture capitalism, for example, they expect returns on investment of 20 to 40% over 3 or 4 years. You're not going to get that out of agriculture. Well, maybe blue gums you could have, but anyway, so they want them fit for purpose. They are also very concerned about the political cycle. It is a policy construct. So to say to someone, come and give me a couple of $1 million to plant trees on my land and we'll give you the carbon credits over the next 10 to 15 years is not necessarily very attractive to some of these people. So the companies will often say, well, if you get them credited, you get them issued, you basically de-risk the project, we'll take everything you've got. So that's what they're looking at. The price, we all hear $23 a tonne. You're simply not going to get $23 a tonne. Right? It's one of the bugbears I've gotten. I'm responsible myself for saying $23 a tonne because it's just so easy to say. The reality is when we sit down and we talk to the purchasers, and I've sat in the offices with these guys and discussed it in detail, is that they have two options. They can go to the Carbon Farming Initiative and buy 5% of their credits. They have to go and have deals with lots and lots of landholders or a deal with one aggregator or broker. They have to do the due diligence on that. They have to ensure that the contracts are correct. What happens if we don't deliver? What happens if there's a fire? What are the risks involved with this? And they price that risk. The best price we've seen is $22.70 for issued compliant credits from a landfill facility. That $22.70 was also a very large parcel. If you think about these guys that have got a 25,000 tonne liability, they're the smaller ones, but some of these guys have got liabilities of 10 million, 20 million tonnes. So they want large parcels. They don't want hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small parcels coming in because they have to check them. They have to go through them line by line. Again, it all costs money. So they want to reduce that. So the parcel sizes, we look at anything from 10,000 to 500,000 to 1 million tonnes. So we've got someone has to aggregate all this, has to pull it all together, and has to be able to work with the landholders. And they're going to want some money too. You'll probably need to find a broker or an aggregator. Those 3 lines there I've got on the graph at the bottom, they're fantastic little lines that we developed. You can see the top one is a green line that looks at what was the Treasury forecast. I noticed they changed it yesterday, but I haven't had a chance to. We'll get the updated figures in the budget. Is what they expected the price of carbon to do out till 2050, and you can see it's a rather beautiful line. The one in the middle is what we consider to be more realistic, and that one is where you actually get out to 2015 where you follow the fixed price period. And then in 2015, because the Australian market then links one way with the European market, the companies, liable entities, can buy up to 50% of their carbon offsets overseas. Now, the overseas price is around $3 to $4 at the moment, so they'll buy everything they can overseas. So essentially in 2015, the market demand halves. And then, so we expect the price to drop anywhere down to possibly $8 to $10. In reality by 2015, and then slowly rise. They're obviously up to around about, I think we're looking at around about 2020 for another $20 in 2020. However, if we do get this international binding agreement, we can expect the prices to go up quite considerably because if America gets involved, they need a lot of carbon, and particularly China as well. And the bottom line is what we consider would be the price should there be no international action. So, but if I stood in front of you here at an investment seminar for the stock market and said, this is how I expect the prices to go, I don't think you'd be sitting here very long. It's a market, it goes up and down all the time. No, so it's just a very interesting one that people like to put these graphs up, but in reality it's going to go all over the place like a... Okay, so where does the money go? Let's all get aboard the money go round, shall we? For starters, the buyer's going to de-risk it. And this is just trying to break it down, say, let's take that 40 hectare property you were talking about, let's just look at how that might pan out. So the buyer, he immediately wants a discount. He has the option of going doing all these contracts and these arrangements with brokers and going to the deal and the wheeling and dealing, or he can just write a cheque for $23 and be done with it and walk away and get back to doing what he was doing. Doesn't need any authority to do that, nothing. It's just a tax, it's just a budget line. So let's say he de-risks it by $1. Then you've got the broker, all right? As a broker, I'm a broker. I have an Australian Financial Services licence. I have compliance obligations. I've got to have an office. I've got to get the pool cleaned. I need my Mercedes serviced, all those sorts of things. So we need to charge our fees. The aggregator out there, the person doing the legwork on the ground, talking to the landholders, checking the documents, etc., they need to pay for their offices and everything else like that they need, their travels. The verifier, they're going to want to get paid. We have seen prices anywhere from $5,000 to $40,000 for doing verification. All right, so it depends on where it is. The $40,000 one was remote Queensland, so it was pretty hard to get to, and it was a very big property. So the prices of verification do range. Then you've got to do your monitoring and reporting. It's a cost. It's going to cost you money to keep the records. You know, farmers love paperwork, don't they? So, but there is that cost involved. Then, of course, whoever actually undertakes the project. So if someone comes in and plants the trees, for example, or changes the methane capture and destruction system, they're going to want to get their money out of it. And then I'll tell you what, as a generous bloke, we'll give you farmers what's left. That's the way it's going to work. The good news about this is there's no reason the landholder can't do all those things themselves. Right? There's no reason whatsoever. And then when you look at that, they're starting to get $18 to $19 a tonne out of it under the current $23. And also the broker and the aggregator can be one in the same. And I suggest to landholder groups that you need to go and chase those economies of scale to reduce the verification costs, to reduce the brokerage costs, to do some of the legwork yourselves, and to make sure that your records are in place so your verification cost comes down. And if you are going to find a broker or an aggregator, go and find a broker or an aggregator that's going to work for the farmer and not for the purchaser. Because you want them to drive the price. You want the broker or the aggregator to be driving the price up for you rather than trying to drive the price down for the buyer. There are some out there. So I had a look at around here in Hahndorf, and we're coming to the close, so we'll get into questions in a minute. But I just had a look at a little property about 10 hectares down there, and this is the tool the government gives us to determine the permanent environmental plantings. And I know it's a bit difficult to see, but there is a little bit of yellow. You can just see a little bit there. I haven't highlighted it very well, but there's some yellow all the way through there. That's actually the forest extent in 1990. So we know what was forested in 1990 and what wasn't. It's relatively incomplete and a bit sketchy, so you might have to provide other evidence. But that little green triangle down the bottom is a 10-hectare stand just south of Hahndorf that I ran the permanent environmental planting methodology on. And these are the returns. This is what you're going to get. So out to 2050, about 37 years, you're looking around about 4.5 tonnes per hectare per year on average. But if you look at that blue graph on the left-hand side, you can see that that is the change in carbon each year. So each year we have a little bit more carbon. So on the left is the change in carbon, on the right is the cumulative carbon. We'll just keep all the carbon as it goes on. But you can see that it's got a distinctive pattern. And that pattern sees that you have a little bit of carbon at the start, a couple of tonnes a hectare, getting up to nearly 9 tonnes a hectare. And the amount you get paid is the value of that bar multiplied by the price of carbon at that time, less costs. So it's a bit hard to work out. I'm not good enough at Excel to actually put that graph in, I'm afraid. But you can see that sometimes you're getting 1 or 2 tonnes or 2 tonnes a hectare, up to 9 tonnes a hectare when the trees are in its peak growth cycle. The other reason that I've put this up there is to show you that over time, when you get to the end of it, out here, you're actually getting very small amounts of carbon per hectare per year. And that's when you're going to have a look at it and say, well, is it worth verifying if I'm only getting a couple of tonnes a hectare? Do I need to keep going with this? You will get around about 65 to 70% of your sequestration value in the first 30 years. So when companies turn up and say, we're going to do a 30-year carbon trade deal with you and put carbon rights on your property for 30 years, that's why. Because they'll get 70% of the benefit. You'll be left, you still have to maintain it for another 70 years. There are provisions that once you've actually gone from that 30-year period, gone from what we call the active sequestration phase into what we call the maintenance phase, your reporting obligations drop off dramatically. So it's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot less frequently. But you can see there is a definite point of maximum benefit. So if you look at it, if we go out on that property now, you planted in 2013 or 2010, I think that one was planted, by 2021 you're hitting your peak returns. So, does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So and I only do this as a guesstimate, all right, because it's very hard to estimate some of the costs that are involved in this. Forestry is pretty straightforward. We know it pretty well. It's a victim of its own good science in many regards, but we do know how much it's going to cost us. Some of the other methodologies, we don't know what they're going to entail yet. But if we had a look at an intensive beef or dairy industry over in Shepparton, or over in the Goulburn Valley near Shepparton, and they were looking at everything they could possibly do. They were looking at putting in feed additives, manure management, actually methane capture and destruction, and they were looking at a benefit of somewhere $100 to $200 or $100 to $150 per beast per year benefit ongoing. Now, that might not sound much, but they were on a 4,000 head dairy, and they were looking at expanding to 10,000. Now that starts to add up. And it's going to make a big difference to a lot of the other guys. I remember leaving that place and it had huge flush down systems and very, very beautifully set up. And as I was driving out of there, I drove past the next door neighbour and he's got the old Bresser-Bick dairy and he's in his gumboots and he's pushing 10 cows at a time into his dairy. And I thought, he's got no hope. None whatsoever. There's no way he will compete when these guys get going. In America, they do this a fair bit. It's very big in America, particularly the methane capture and destruction. They don't start until you get 15,000 head. They are a much bigger size. So we had a chat to them about coming over here and they said, well, perhaps we'll go down to 10,000 head now. I don't know of too many 10,000 head dairies in Australia. There's lots of small ones. Fertiliser efficiency, we're looking at somewhere $3 to $5 a hectare per year as a benefit. Now, fertiliser efficiency, we'll be looking at things like polymer-coated fertilisers, slow-release fertilisers, or basically what they're trying to stop is denitrification. And they want to stop denitrification and stop nitrous oxide going into the atmosphere for two reasons. One, it's a greenhouse gas. Secondly, you can get carbon credits, and if it's going into the atmosphere, your plants aren't using it. So they're also looking at things like variable rate technology. The issue will come back to, how do you actually get paid for it? Because the companies that are supplying the fertiliser generally have a carbon liability. So they want the carbon credits. Now, does it make more sense to tool up every single landholder in a district with GPS systems, variable rate technology, changing the spreaders, etc.? Or does it make more sense to have one person doing it with the right equipment, claiming the carbon credits and giving you cheaper fertiliser or better crop growth? I don't know how it's going to pan out, but we did do a bit of work with one fertiliser company and we looked at it, and I think we got very close to saying we could actually give landholders the technology if they signed up for a period of time to give us the carbon credits, and it made sense for everybody. It was a win-win situation. The concept behind a market-based mechanism is one, as I mentioned earlier, to reduce or to send investment to the lowest cost abatement measure, and secondly, it's to unlock the innovative capacity that exists within the marketplace. Farmers will come up with ideas. They will figure out how to do it. They'll see an opportunity and they'll grab it. I have a lot of faith in Australian farmers. They've got through a hell of a lot over the years. You look at soil carbon, you might be looking at $3 to $7 per hectare, and forestry potentially after costs $80, $160 per hectare per year, but as I showed in the other graph, it's going to vary. Out here you might be looking maybe slightly more, and it also is obviously weather dependent. You also have to consider that it's not just about the carbon. As I've mentioned, farming is about complementary, not competitive measures. And this nutrient management system I've got over here, that's a piggery. I mean, it's simple technology. That's a plastic bag essentially sitting over a manure pond. Sun heats, methane gets created through the anaerobic digestion. And these guys can create carbon from it, carbon credits, which they get paid for. They get RECs from it, renewable energy certificates, which they get paid for, and they generate electricity, either offsetting the cost of the carbon price or selling it back into the grid. So they win on three levels. For forestry, you can actually undertake agricultural or agroforestry activities and you can get the value of the timber. You obviously have environmental benefits coming from it, and you can create the carbon certificates as well. So there's lots of different ways to bundle these up. I don't know of terribly many projects that make sense just on carbon. You have to look at those cross-production or additional production benefits. But ultimately, we're trying to benefit the atmosphere. That's what it's about. We know you're going to have questions when you come back, all right, when you go away and you start thinking about this. So please direct them to the Regional Landcare Facilitator or go back to the websites and have a look. So thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions? No? Excellent. Thank you.